Hey there, and welcome back to Roll With Us DMs. Today, I have a viewer-requested video to take a look at Nimble RPG and DC20. Both of these systems were born out of 5th edition homebrew. The Dungeon Coach, if you look at his earlier works, put out a manuscript entitled Alkinder's Almanac, which was tweaks to 5th edition to improve its gameplay. And if you look within those pages, you'll see the foundation of DC20, though working within 5th edition's framework. Nimble RPG did a very similar thing, initially being a hack for 5th edition, where you would roll damage dice instead of an attack roll, and then your damage dice would determine whether you hit or crit, and some other changes that would speed up gameplay in 5th edition. Recently, Nimble has released its full version, completely independent of D&D 5th edition, very similarly to how DC20 breaks from 5th edition, becoming its own entity. While both of these systems were born from 5th edition homebrew, and they were both trying to solve similar problems, they diverge in their approach in some interesting ways, and yet come together and share a lot of common DNA. Is that shared DNA strictly from the 5th edition D&D foundation that both systems have? Well, come with me and we'll take a look at various aspects of both systems and see how they compare to each other. I've put together a bunch of graphics which I'll put up on the screen, and the first of those is action points. So as you can see, DC20 gives 4 action points and Nimble gives 3, and both systems recover their action points at the end of the creature's turn. The fact that the action points recover at the end of the turn is a very important distinction between, say, DC20 and Nimble and a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition that also uses essentially action points and action point economy, and that's because of the way that reactions are handled. As you can see here, both systems have an uncapped number of reactions. Both systems let you use your next turn's action points to make reactions. Nimble does cap each reaction at 1, meaning you can only make 1 opportunity attack per round, although the other reactions you are able to take once per round. And then just like in DC20, both systems, any action points that you spend on these reactions, you're not going to have those actions when your turn comes back around. But what this does is creates an environment of gameplay where you're not trying to hoard your resources, you're not trying to hoard your actions for reactions later. You spend all of your actions, end your turn, get your actions back, and then you're free to spend them on reactions as you need. If you don't need the reactions, then when your turn comes back around, you have all your action points for that round. Another interesting comparison between DC20 and Nimble is the number of attributes. So both systems use only 4 attributes, and for the most part they line up 1-to-1, although the naming is a little bit different. Nimble stuck with the traditional strength and dexterity, where DC20 went with might and agility. Both systems use intelligence, and DC20 stuck with charisma, where Nimble changed what's essentially their charisma to will. The next thing to look at is going to be skills. Now, I will say up front that these are not all of the skills in DC20, but they are all of the skills from Nimble. So the closest comparison really was to just take Nimble's skills and see how they compared to DC20's skills. When we look at it, both systems have Arcana and they both use intelligence, so therefore should function relatively the same. Nimble has examination, which would be the equivalent of DC20's investigation, both using intelligence. Nimble has finesse, and DC20 has trickery. These are both used for thieving type things. DC20 is going to use agility and Nimble is going to use dexterity, but they're essentially the same attribute. And you'll notice that as we go down, there is like one or two notable differences, and I'll point those out when we come to them. Influence is going to be influence, insight, insight. An interesting naming thing with the skills here, for Nimble, they have a skill called Might, where DC20 has an attribute called Might, and then the skill for DC20 that lines up to Might is Athletics. Nimble uses a skill called Lore, DC20 History. Nimble uses Naturecraft, and DC20 uses Survival. Nimble uses Perception. DC20 uses Awareness. Oh, I want to back up one. Naturecraft in Nimble uses Will, which, as we saw in the previous slide, lined up with Charisma from DC20. In DC20, Survival uses Intelligence, so this is kind of a split. Awareness and Perception is another big one that's different. Because DC20 has that concept of Prime and Nimble doesn't have anything like that. Awareness using your Prime attribute, your best stats bonus. And in Nimble it's tied to Will, which would be similar to how you would envision it in D&D 5th edition. And Stealth is Stealth in both games. DC20 using Agility, of course, and Nimble using Dexterity. Another interesting distinction is the way that both of these systems set their DCs. They are fairly close, but you'll notice some distinct differences. They almost don't align on any actual naming. In fact, they don't align with any of their naming, but you could convert a Nimble DC to DC20 or a DC20 DC to Nimble just by finding where on this table it fits. DC20 uses very easy at 5, moderate at 10, hard at 15, very hard at 20, extremely hard at 25, and nearly impossible at 30, scaling by 5 down the chart. Nimble starts with an easy DC of 8, and their next DC is challenging at 15, and then extremely difficult at 20 plus. If you were taking Nimble's DC 8 and you wanted to convert that to DC 20, just for some practical advice, I would suggest, depending on how easy that check is, you could make it DC 5, you could make it DC 10. I can't see a case really where you would have somebody roll a very easy check in DC 20. So if you were going to use that DC 8 Nimble DC, say you were taking something from Nimble and converting it to DC 20, I would probably go with DC 10. And DC 15 lines up with DC 15 for hard and challenging. And then DC 20 plus. So you could almost just one-to-one the DCs. I wouldn't use, I would not make an 8 of 5 in DC 20 probably. Okay, now let's look at falling damage. DC 20 uses a 5-foot space and counts everything in spaces. DC 20 also has very low hit points in general compared to other systems, so taking 1 damage for each space that you fall is nothing to laugh at. Nimble 1d6 per 10 feet is exactly like D&D 5th edition. In both systems, a cool idea that they both have agreed on is that collision damage is shared between both creatures if 2 creatures collide with each other. While we're talking about damage, let's take a look at death and dying. What happens if you take too much damage? DC 20 has a mechanic called Death's Door. Nimble has a similar condition that I don't believe actually has a name. In DC 20, you die at a negative hit points equal to your prime plus combat mastery. What that means is, at level 1, let's say, your prime is going to be 3 and your combat mastery 1, so you'll die at negative 4 hit points. DC 20 has you make a saving throw at the start of each of your turns. Failure makes you start to bleed, which will push you closer to death. In Nimble, you die after you take 6 wounds. You take a wound for taking damage while at 0. When you attack or cast a spell, you need to pass a DC10 strength save or take a wound. Also, both systems you can only spend 1 action point while you're in this death's door kind of state. So they're handling being at 0 hit points very similarly in that you still get to act, you're not unconscious, you only get 1 action point. You are definitely bleeding out injured. DC20 puts most of that in its death save and its recovery check and its only being able to spend 1 action point. Nimble has you have that feeling of bleeding out by needing to pass a saving throw for every attack or spell that you cast while you're in this death's door type situation. So how exactly do you recover hit points in these systems? Well, largely through resting, and the resting rules are quite distinct. A lot of similarities, but you'll notice some striking differences. Both systems have a 10-minute rest. In DC20, it's called a quick rest. In Nimble, it's called catch breath. Both systems let you spend rest points or hit dice to restore lost hit points. Only DC20 has a 1-hour rest, called a short rest, where you can also spend your rest points and regain some short rest abilities. They both have an 8-hour rest. DC20 uses a long rest. Nimble uses make camp. Both let you spend rest points or hit dice to heal your hit points. Notably, DC20's long rest recovers your mana and any once per day abilities. This is where it's distinct in the special rests. DC20 has a full rest, Nimble has a safe rest, and this safe rest is the only way to recover hit dice, mana, and other class resources. DC20 gives you some temp HP or other benefit for taking a full rest. Full rest for DC20 is a 24-hour period of rest in a safe location like a town or a tavern. Safe rest for Nimble is only 8 hours, but it requires being in a safe location, again, like an inn or your own bed or something. So if you're out in the field and you make camp, you can heal yourself, spending your hit dice, but you will not recover your mana or other resources. So now that you've recovered your hit points and you're ready to get back into combat, let's take a look at initiative and see how both systems handle initiative. DC20 uses a D20 plus agility versus a set DC. So the GM sets a DC, and the players roll a D20 plus agility trying to beat that DC. Half the players need to succeed in order to succeed. And if the players succeed, they get to go first, their team. If they don't succeed, then the monsters get to go first. The players set their order, and the GM sets the monster order. What happens is if the player side wins, or whenever the players go, they will pick one of their members to take a turn, and then the GM will put a monster's turn in. Then the players will pick another player to go, and the GM will select a monster. And once everybody in the combat has acted, then the initiative order is set. So it's kind of a dynamic initiative order that's being set through the first round of combat. Nimble has a really interesting approach, though, I have to say. 1d20 plus dexterity to determine how many action points a creature gets on their first turn. If you roll your d20, add your dexterity, and get a 1-digit result, you get 1 action point on your first turn. If the result of that roll is 2 digits, so 10 to 19, you get 2 action points on your first turn. And if you get 20 plus, you get 3 action points on your first turn. What I really like about this is it's very distinct and different than any other system that I've seen. It makes really good use of the action point economy in a very interesting way, because you already have this resource called an action point, and initiative is usually just what order people get to act in. What Nimble does instead is say the better you are at initiative, the better you are at reacting to the combat in your first turn. Of course, when your first turn ends, you will regain all of your action points. But I think this is an interesting way to start off a combat. And I think if people and monsters, characters, monsters, whatever, don't roll very high, they're not going to have very many action points, which means that first round of combat should go pretty quick. So now that we're ready to spend those action points, let's take a look at how these two systems handle the multiple check penalty or something similar to that. Both systems use stacking disadvantage in cases where characters are doing the same action multiple times. In DC20, it's for making the same check multiple times in a turn. So if you make multiple attacks, cast multiple spells, make multiple medicine checks, make multiple analyze creature checks, multiple athletics checks for grappling, shoving, that kind of thing. Each kind of check has its own multiple check penalty. Nimble only gives this stacking disadvantage for attacking. Next on the list is the mana spend limit. Both systems use a similar mana spend limit, which is going to scale the same way that you would expect spell slots to scale in other systems, meaning that at levels 1 and 2 you can only spend 1 mana on a spell. At level 3 you can spend 2. At level 5 you can spend 3. So essentially half your level is going to be the amount of mana that you can spend on a spell. One final thing, I don't have a chart for this one, but when looking at the combat in general, both systems tried to consolidate and speed things up. They went in very different ways to realize this. For DC20, they removed the damage dice. So you roll to attack, and that roll will determine how much damage you deal. Every weapon and spell has a set amount of damage that it does, or that it heals, and DC20 uses a by 5 system where every 5 that you beat a DC by, whether that's the target's defense or the spell's DC, you'll gain usually +1, either damage or healing. What this does is create a situation where you are adding up a lot of little +1s. For example, if I make an attack roll and I get 27 and the monster's defense is 12, that's by 5, 15 over the defense. So it's 3 extra damage there, plus the base damage of the weapon, which let's call it 2. So that's going to be 5 points of damage. That's how DC20 tries to speed up combat through elimination of damage rolls. Nimble, on the other hand, goes the other direction. You don't roll to hit, per se. You just roll the damage dice. So DC20 removed the damage dice. Nimble removed the attack roll. So in Nimble, you pick up your damage dice, you roll them, and the leftmost die that you roll determines whether an attack hits, misses, or crits. If that damage die rolls a 1, it misses. If that damage die rolls anything except for 1 or the highest value, it hits. And if that damage die rolls the max amount for that die, then you crit. It does some interesting things with weapons and the damage dice in general, meaning a die 4 has a 25% chance to miss and a 25% chance to crit, with only 2 other results, which are to hit. And a D10, on the other hand, has a 10% chance to miss and a 10% chance to crit, with an 80% chance for something else. So you can see how each die size is really important. A dagger is going to crit more often, miss more often than a D10, say, longsword. Advantage and disadvantage works very similarly in both systems. In DC20, advantage and disadvantage works the way that you would expect. You add that many D20s and drop the highest or the lowest depending on if you have advantage or disadvantage. In Nimble, it's a little bit different because you're not rolling to hit. So you add another die to the damage pool and then drop the highest or lowest depending. And then if you have double disadvantage, you would roll 2 extra dice and take the higher or the lowest depending on if it was double disadvantage or double advantage. And that just about concludes my comparison of Nimble and DC20. Which one is right for you? I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is both systems have a lot in common. They were both born from 5th edition homebrew. They both have very unique mechanics. DC20 may benefit from the fact that it is an unfinished system at this point, where Nimble is finished. So DC20 has some time to continue to grow and change. Will we see some of Nimble in DC20 in the future? Possibly. I think that the Nimble initiative is very interesting. And I wonder if something like that would work well in DC20. But what do you think? Have you played Nimble? Have you played DC20? What do you like about the systems that you've played? If you've played them both, how do you think they compare? Let us know in the comments section below. And until next time, keep rolling with us.